If you asked me how do you edit your photographs, I'd respond with a question. I'd ask you in return, what do you want to know? And regardless of what your question or reply or answer is to that, I would come back with yet another question. Why do you want to know? Because even before we start looking at editing our photographs, we need to understand why we are editing them. I decided to do this video because a number of weeks ago, I mentioned at the end of one of my videos that it would be maybe worthwhile me doing an editing video. Would somebody like me to do that? I am going to, but I'm probably not going to use the photograph that I took on that particular evening. I might save that for another day. And the reason for that is because I want to go back a stage. I want to explain to you some theory and some ideas behind editing which start even before we touch the camera. And I touched on it just now in the introduction. The basic thing that we need to understand is why we edit our photographs. Let me explain how this becomes really important at the editing stage. Now let's forget the fact that it's a beautiful location, the weather was fantastic and I was having a really good time enjoying what I do. What you need to think about with this image, and I was at the time, is why was I photographing it? What was my reason for taking this image in the first place? Because there was a lot of elements that went into it. Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, I was on holiday and the weather was fantastic. But the reasons that I was taking that image are all to do with light in this picture and the colour of light and the transformation that the landscape was going through. These fantastic blues that you get around just after sunset when we're going into what we call the blue hour. But just on the rock, it was reflecting these beautiful pink tones, and then we had the slow shutter speed working, getting those nice white, fluffy effects along the edge of the waterline when it was breaking over the rocks. And those are the things which were driving me and impelling me to take this image. So my whys were the colours, the blues, the pinks, and the water. And if I didn't know that when I took the image, if I didn't understand that at the time, I may have composed it or took it in a slightly different way. So even before I get back to editing this image, I've already thought about what is my why and how I'm going to do it is the next stage to think about. So before we jump onto the computer and start looking at how we're going to edit, we need to think about what we're going to edit because it's equally important. And what we're going to edit comes from that first question of why. Quite often when people start editing, they don't know when to stop, where to begin, how much is too much. And that's why I always try and relate my editing back to what I did in the field and ask those important questions at that time, because that gives me my starting point. So in this image, we're going to be thinking about, yes, the basics: exposure, contrast, detail, highlight, shadow detail. But these things are not as important as capturing the feeling and the emotion of the image. If we end up with shadows which are a little bit blacked up because it's a little bit dark, it's not as important because it's not part of my why I was taking the image. What's important is making sure we get those good blue tones in there, the nice warm pinks, and get some detail and something in those white water and the flow water and the rocks, just to make sure it all stands out. So I want to enhance these features. I want to make sure that I'm driving that message home to the people which are viewing and looking at those pictures, because that's how my editing begins. It's about, in the most natural way possible, emphasizing, escalating, exaggerating, whatever term you want to use, the parts in the image that were important to me out in the field, because that's what I want to share with you guys. So let's look at the picture on the computer and we'll look at those elements now and then go into how I actually edited it. Okay, so here we go. Let's have a look at what we've got. So I've opened up the raw file for you inside of Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. And this is my choice of sort of editing software. You can actually use any software you want, but the principles that we're going to talk about will be exactly the same. So let's get into it and look at what we're dealing with. We first of all got to really remember what our why was. We've got to understand why we originally wanted to take this picture and what those things are, because as I said before, that is our starting point. And looking at this as a starting point, then we need to think about using what we've got at our disposal to bring out those blue tones, to concentrate some attention and give some life to that reflected light that we can kind of see on the rocks, but it's a little bit dull and flat. And also the waves are a bit dull and flat there as well. And those were things which attracted me to the image and things that I wanted to bring out. So we're going to do that. So for me, like I said, the raw file does look a little bit flat. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of life back into the image. And I could do that with an overall exposure adjustment. But if you look at the histogram up here now, you can see that on the right hand side, we've got a lot of room to move everything on the highlights to the right without shifting the whole exposure. So that's what I'm actually going to do. I'm just going to adjust those whites to begin with, and maybe the highlights, and then we'll have a look at the shadows and see if we want to move those as well. Because the overall feel of the image I'm quite happy with. So if I just start to bring those whites up, you'll see that the image slowly becomes a lot brighter. And it's really just a matter of deciding where you want to do them. So I'm going to leave them about 49, 50, something like that. We don't have to be that precise at this stage. Now I think there's a little bit more we can do to bring out those white waves and bring out some of the highlight areas. So I'm just going to bring up the highlights a little bit extra as well. Just bring them up a little bit. Not too far, because if we go too far we'll start to get some clipping in there. So I think we're just going to bring them up just a little bit, just to give a little bit of extra depth and life to it. So I've got up to about +7. That's probably far enough for me. Now there's a little bit of room, a little bit of things we can do to play with the shadow detail in there as well, because although I don't mind the shadows being blocked up, for me having the shadows quite as dark as they are in this subject adds a little bit too much contrast to the image. It's just a little bit too harsh for what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to lighten up those shadow areas here in the middle of the screen, in the middle of the rocks. So let's bring those up as well and see how we feel about those. Now obviously we can go too far and we can see that although that's added a lot of detail and a lot of light into those shadow areas and brought up the rocks themselves, it just looks unnatural. And we've got to be careful with our editing that we don't go to a point where we are looking at something which is really quite an unnatural image. So let's take and dial that back. I think somewhere around, once again, the 40-50 mark is going to be about enough for me. Oh, I can't get it. There we go. Leave it around 48, something like that. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so what do we want to do next? Well, I could warm up the overall image and bring up those warm areas and warm tones, but it's the reflected light on the rocks that I'm interested in and the blues themselves. I don't want to add warmth into the blues. I don't want to change the overall feel of the picture. And I certainly don't want any more warm or magenta going into the whites. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and do this just in the hue, saturation and luminance panel, where we control individual colours. So we're thinking about the warmth of the light. So we've probably got some oranges, some yellows, possibly some magentas and things in there as well. So let's bring up the orange first. And I think, well, let's just see how it goes. So I think if we keep bringing this up, you can just kind of see that side of the rock over here, where I'm moving the mouse now, come to life as we do that. If I go extreme, look, you'll be able to see how quite orange it is, but it's unnatural if we do that. So once again, we want to do this quite subtly and just do it enough just to sort of enhance it, but not overpower it and make it look edited and completely wrong. So that's the orange. I'm going to leave it around +22. Now the yellow, yeah, same with the yellow. Look, if we bring the yellow right up, we can start to see some of those other tones coming in as well. And we're going to bring it up, but once again, I don't want to overpower it. I don't want to bring it to the point where we're having to overgo with the editing and the power of it, because the yellow will start to make it look very unnatural. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up to around maybe, I don't know, where are we at now, 61. Let's go back a bit. Let's half that. 36, 37, that will do. About 37, that's absolutely fine for what we're trying to do. Magenta, now you quite often get a magenta sort of cast this time of the evening. So if there's any magenta in there, yeah, there's a little bit. I'm just going to bring that up as well. Can you see how that's bringing a bit more of those pinks and back into the side of the rock? of Pulpit Rock itself. So let's bring magenta up, probably, yeah, around there, around the 40 mark. Yep, absolutely fine. The last thing I want to do is actually, for me, the blue, I don't know, is the blue a little bit overpowering? We can't go too far. We take a blue out of everything because there's a lot of blue light in the image, but it's just overpowering a little bit. So I'm just going to come back only -4 or 5, something like that, just a tiny bit, just to take the edge off it. Now I'm actually quite happy with the colours as they are, and that's probably all I'm going to do with the colours themselves, because I think it's about right. I'm happy with the exposure, I'm happy with it and where it is. Now I nearly always add a vignette to the image just to draw your eye into the picture. Now I can't really do that when it's on when it's this big in the screen, so we'll knock it down to 6%. We're going to go up to the selection tools. We're going to go into the radial gradient, and we'll draw out a radial gradient from the middle there. We're going to invert it so that we can just see where we are, and then if we need to, we can make that a little bit smaller, because it's just not quite there at the moment. So let's bring that back in. Let's bring that back in. Bring this side back in as well. We can just start to see now that we're getting a bit of that gradient on the screen. Now I don't want to see the overlay when I'm doing this, but all I'm going to do is just knock the exposure back a little bit. Far too much. When you start to see it, you've gone too far. Yep, so that's as far as I'm going to go with that. So that's a gradient added in. And I'll probably look at the sharpening a little bit. So to look at the sharpening, we're going to go back up and we're going to view the image at 100%. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to make sure that I don't introduce any artifacts into the image or create any undue problems that we can't see until it's printed. So I'm going to go back, knock the radius back to about back to 0.5. Something I always do. It's just sort of a way of controlling the amount of radius the amount of sharpening that we get. I'm sure if you went to somebody who does sharpening all the time, I don't do a huge amount, they would be able to give you far more detail on that. Maybe it's something I'll cover in another video for you in the future. If you're interested in that, then tell me about it, and maybe that's something we can do. So let's look at the amount. Now I'll show you what I mean. If we take this right up to over sort of like 100%, you can start to see where we're getting some highlight warnings coming on the screen, and also it looks very gritty and wrong, and we just want to take it back until we're not seeing any of that, and it might only be a tiny bit. So I think I'm probably happy with it around there. I don't want to go any more than that, to be honest. That just breaks it up enough. Now the only other thing I'll mention is I generally would sort of look at having a lens correction on there, but my lens corrections, chromatic aberration and the profile corrections are all added automatically when I upload my files, because it's a standard that I have in there for those lenses that I use. So let's take this back out to fit on the screen. I guess the only thing we really need to do now is actually look at comparing this image to the original one that we took. So there we are, we've got the two images up on the screen side by side. The left hand side one is the one that we've edited, and the right hand one is the raw file that we started with. And I think, well, I hope that you'll agree that actually I've managed to bring out some more detail in there, that I've boosted the saturation of some of those highlighted areas, some of those tones that I really wanted to bring out in the image, and I've answered the questions that I set at the original stage when I was taking the picture, the things that attracted to it, my reason for taking the images, and how knowing why at the beginning of this process has enabled me to decide what to focus on, what I need to edit, and during the course of the video I've shown you how to do that. Well, once again guys, thanks for watching the video. I really do hope that you enjoyed it and you found it useful. I certainly enjoyed doing an editing video for a change. It's been a little while since I've done it, and I hope that you found my approach to this video useful, and thinking not just about how you edit your images, but why you edit your images and why that needs to start out in the field. If you found this video useful and you enjoyed it, then please let me know and maybe I can do some more like it. And I hope by approaching editing this way, if you're new to the channel, that you'll go on to watch some of my images taken out in the field, because that's what we do most of the time, and that will give you a little bit better insight into why I work the way that I do and why that question of starting with why is so important. If you did like it, give it a thumbs up because it really helps the channel. Of course, if you want to see more content, please subscribe and stick around. I really do need your support right now at the moment. That would be absolutely fantastic, and I'm looking forward to doing the next video. I'll see you really soon.